Today's video is going to be less a review of Night Voices by Robert Aickman, and is more so going to be me evangelizing to you why you need to read him yesterday. Welcome to Echoed Words Reviews, and welcome to the third installment of the spooky Spooktober stories series. It does not roll off the tongue. Hope you're having a great day, or if you're listening to this while trying to fall asleep, I hope that this lulls you into a restful slumber. Although Robert Aickman's stories are so goddamn scary, I think you have a slim chance of that happening. So without further ado, let's dive into Robert Aickman and Night Voices. I'm still on meds, so today we're going to be sticking with some good old-fashioned water. So Robert Aickman was a British horror writer. He was actually the grandson of Richard Marsh, the man who wrote The Beetle, the book that we reviewed last week. If you haven't seen that yet, I suggest you watch it. But unlike his grandfather, who wrote Gothic horror, Aickman instead wrote, I guess what you could call ghost stories. However, to do so would be incredibly reductive. So the only way that I could really describe Robert Aickman is as, like, highbrow horror. I mean, the guy is a master of his craft. Through and through. I have never read anybody who writes like Aickman does. He really is a singular force. He is genre, but elevates it to dizzying heights. Hard to read sometimes, but well worth it. So Night Voices, published posthumously in 1985, is a collection of 6 short stories. Funny enough, I actually recommend that you don't buy this book. Not because it's bad. Far, 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 far from it. But because these are very expensive. Usually they're about $100 to $125, I think, is what I saw on eBay. I lucked out with this one and got it for like $45 or $50. And mainly I bought it because, I mean, look at that cover. It's, there's a glare, but look at that cover. It is like an old, like, 70s, 80s horror VHS cover. It's amazing. But you can find these stories in other collections for much cheaper. I know NYRB has published a collection of his short stories. But whatever collection you get, do yourself a favor and make sure that it has his short story, The Stains. That is just such an outstanding short story that, to me, really captures his style. At least of what I've read so far. And it's the first short story in Night Voices. The Stains is about an older man whose wife has finally succumbed to a long-term illness. Seeking space to grieve and get his bearings, he goes to live with his brother at his brother's rectory, along with his brother's wife. Crucial to the story, in addition to being a rector, his brother is also an authority on lichens. One day, this older man, Stephen, while walking on the moors, spots a young woman. He is immediately captivated by her. Her strange mannerisms intoxicate him, and very soon he finds himself in a whirlwind of obsession, completely changing his life around so that they can be together. He severs his ties to the modern world, his flat in London, his job with the civil service, just so that they can have a life together. Even after reading, it's not quite clear if this girl, who is kind of hinted to be some sort of mythical creature, like a wood nymph or something, has put him under some sort of spell or mesmerized him in some way. Or if this is just Stephen's reaction after being, in a strange way, liberated after his wife died. As it unfolds, Stephen begins to kind of compartmentalize his life into what he calls primary issues and secondary issues. And while secondary issues first started as things like, you know, his job and bills and what to do with his apartment, it soon grows to encompass things like, why is he beginning to rot? And why is it that wherever he goes, immediately begins to get overrun with moss and lichen? And the way that Aickman writes about these, like, transformations is so flippant. You could very easily miss them if you're reading fast. And that is something that I love about Aickman, is that he writes not as, like, this objective narrator. The narrative unfolding is delivered in an entirely subjective way. The things that get the importance placed on them are the things that matter to the character, not necessarily the reader. In trying to describe Aickman, you're going to hear me reference filmmakers a lot. And that's honestly because I know more about film than I do about books, but also because, to me, Aickman is so filmic. Like, I don't know if it's just my background and what I do, but when reading all of his stories, I couldn't help but just start making shooting boards in my head. And that's not because he's overly descriptive. He is far, far from it. But it's because everything, from the way that he structures his sentences to the words that he chooses, are designed to elicit a strong emotional reaction in the reader. The closest, like, corollary I can think to Aickman's writing is the sound design of Andrei Tarkovsky, in that instead of going for like a realistic soundscape, Tarkovsky would minimize or mute sounds that didn't matter to characters and then amplify sounds that did. And it's that subjectivity that I think makes Aickman's work so captivating. And in this story, that subjectivity takes the form in that the only thing that this character, Stephen, cares about is this woman, Nell. He couldn't give a shit about anything else. Even when his hand is like rotting and withering away and looks corpse-like, the biggest reaction it gets from him is, huh, oh my god, she is so beautiful. Like, he is so just focused on her that he can't think about anything else. It was always the trouble. So long as one was far from the place one calls home, one could successfully cast secondary matters from the mind, or at least from the hurting part of it. But from the moment of return, in fact, from some little while before that, one simply had to recognize that, for most of one's life, secondary matters were just about all there were. Stephen had learned ages ago that secondary matters were always the menace. Desperation, therefore, possibly made its contribution to the mutual passion that charged the few hours available to them. Within a week, the walls might be darkened all over, and what could the development after that conceivably be? Stephen strongly suspected that the mossiness, the malady, would become more conspicuously three-dimensional at any moment, only as a first move, of course. He managed to close his mind against all secondary considerations and give love its fullest license yet. And the story concludes with what I found to be an undeniably terrifying scene. But in that terror, there was also a sweetness. For all of the horrors that Aickman portrays, there is such poetry in it. And I think it's because he delves very deep into the psychology of his characters. Not in like a clinical or analytical way. It's not like you're reading an allegory for something. It's not like that. But he delves into the psychology of the thought process of his character. And they're all so incredibly flawed and vulnerable and human. And it is just beautiful to behold. If you look up Robert Aickman online, you'll find that some people really don't like his work because to them it makes no sense. And they spin themselves up trying to find a logic, trying to make sense of it. And if you're that type of reader, I don't think Aickman is for you. Like a Tarkovsky film, like Georges Bataille's Story of the Eye, you are just supposed to feel what is being written. There's no logic here. It is just so spiritual and intangible, and you have to cede control and let yourself just be swept away by the current. Robert Aickman was a conservationalist, and so you'll see a lot of similar themes in all of his stories. The dichotomy between the hustle and bustle of the cities, London more often than not, and then the idyllic countryside. People seeking refuge in the bosom of rural England, away from the city, is a common device in Aickman's stories. Aickman uses the wonder of nature as the place to house these mysteries, these wonders that go beyond our comprehension. Kind of like Lovecraft, but better. More artistic. I don't know much about Aickman, but one thing that I do know is that he derided the Industrial Revolution, not just for its pollution and contamination of nature, but the fact that, in a way, it robbed humankind of its spirituality. Kind of like what Nietzsche talks about. On the subject of contamination, that's another thing that you see in the Stains. He sees the modern world as being this contaminating, pollutive force, and there comes a time in the story when he and Nell go to London, and Stephen is so transfixed on trying to keep her pure, uncontaminated. From all of the modern bullshit that he'll hate on one hand, but then also is a crucial part of his life. For instance, one of the things that he keeps harping on is trying to get her a dress when they're in London, and he rattles off the shops one after another until they find an open store, and she's not really feeling it, but he's like, I want to get you this dress. Also, when he's in the countryside, one of his preoccupations is having to go shop for furniture and stoves and stuff. So there's definitely a tension where Stephen wants to give himself up to this primitivism and be with Nell. But on the other hand, he is always a man out of place. Whether he likes it or not, he is from the city. He is a modern man. The second story, Just a Song at Twilight, is a lovely short story about a married couple who are drifting apart. They leave London and stay with some friends on an island that I think is off of Portugal. While there, they decide to stay and buy a house. And just as you're getting to know these characters, a brush with the supernatural comes in, and the story abruptly ends. That's something you'll see a lot in Aickman's stories, these abrupt endings. But up until the end, it's this insightful, poetic story of a failing marriage. One that is failing, not due to anything supernatural, but due to the most understandable and human reasons. Timo indeed had been the worst problem of all. Lydia had traveled abroad with him several times, but only to places where life was, and was meant to be, a dream. The new difficulties brought back to her the disadvantages of marrying a foreigner, who, moreover, could not speak any foreign language that was of the slightest use. Timo really did lose his head and his temper when meeting the incessant small injustices, and was always being made to explain more than had been asked at the outset. Even to her, his explanations of quite simple facts seemed thinner and thinner. However absurdly, she began to feel that there really was something hidden, including from her. She realized that all their years of fretting and fighting in London had been play, and that she had never seen Timo compelled to deal with real difficulties, perhaps with real life, whatever that was. And certainly, she could contribute little herself, beyond she was ashamed and alarmed to note an increasing, very English, snappiness. The third story, simply titled Laura, is the shortest of the bunch. I think it's only about 8 or 10 pages. This story is about a man who meets the perfect girl at a party, only to have her disappear. And at certain moments of his life, for the next 30 or so years, he will run into this woman. The most allegorical of all 6, I think Laura lends itself to kind of the most direct interpretation. The fourth story is called Rosamund's Bower. This one is about 2 students who go trekking across the English countryside looking for this mythical place called Rosamund's Bower. They eventually find it. It's a hedge maze, and one of them walks in. And what he finds inside is either like a purgatory or a hell or a prison designed specifically for him. Increasingly getting more and more surreal as he approaches the heart, where Rosamund resides. Rosamund's Bower opens with a simple saying, "You don't find anything that matters by going out and looking for it." And I found that interesting because there was a similar line in his grandfather's book, The Beetle, which was essentially, yeah, you never find anything that you're looking for. It takes not looking for something to find it. But that idea is also repeated in another story in this book. Maybe it's too simplistic to try and extrapolate anything from that, but I guess that could be seen as, you know, Aickman's distaste for the intellectualizing of everything. And this never-ending pursuit of knowledge and discovery for, like, academic cataloging purposes. He could see that her feet were bare. The lawn was as green taffeta. To him, its texture might have been a faint squirming embarrassment had he been unshod. But the sight, the sound, and even the feel of her white feet advancing delicately across that faint tinkling green would be with him for all his days. No terror, no lassitude, no deception would ever erase it. It had been hard to decide how loud or soft was the unceasing knell. It was equally unclear how slowly or swiftly the woman was coming toward him. Her hair was golden. Aylwin Scott had seen such hair painted on the walls of churches. It seemed to him that within an instant she would be in touching distance. Even her lips were mulberry-colored, either of their nature or stained with the fruit, but perhaps by magic. The bone structure of her face and head seemed as beneficent as that of the Virgin Mother. Before the consummation of their proximity, a single, mutually joyous touch, all that is ever necessary, a shadow fell. Despite the damp weakness of the sun, the shadow was black and huge. The fourth story is called The Trains, and it is about 2 women who are kind of foils of each other, who are on a hiking excursion across the British countryside. They get lost and eventually come to a house with an eccentric owner and his manservant. The owner being the descendant of the man who built the railway in the area, a railway that through the entire story regularly disrupts the peace. But as charming and captivating as this enigmatic owner is, things take a turn for the worse in a bone-chilling short story. They had descended to the town quite suddenly from the wildest moors, as one does in the north. Now equally suddenly it was as if there were no towns, but only small, long-toothed Neanderthals crouched behind rocks waiting to tear the 2 of them to pieces. Air roared past in incalculable bulk under the lucent sky, deeply blue but traversed by well-spaced masses of sharply edged white cloud, like the floats in a Mediterranean pageant. The misty, smoky, reeking air of the city had enchanted Margaret with its perpetually changing atmospheric effects, a meteorological drama unavailable in any other environment. But up here, the air was certainly life itself. The path was hard to find across the heather, the only landmarks being contours, and neither of them expert with a map, but they happily advanced in silence, all barriers between them blown down, even Margaret's heavy rucksack, far from her mind. Mimi took her own, even heavier rucksack, for granted at all times. "Surely there's a train," said Margaret, when they had walked for 2 or 3 hours. "Oh, God," said Mimi, the escapist. The Trains is one of Aickman's earlier stories. I believe it was in his first published collection ever that he published with his lover at the time. And being one of his earlier stories, it's definitely a bit more straightforward. However, very scary, unsettling. And then lastly is a story called Mark Ingestra, The Customer's Tale. This one was my least favorite of the bunch. It's a retelling of a story of a man who went to get his haircut and then woke up in this, like, dungeon. The reveal at the end gives it away. I'm not going to talk about it very much because there's no real way of talking about it without the reveal. It kind of made me, like, laugh at the end, and then I was like, I felt like I wasted my time a little bit with that one. But the other 5, to me, were just so fantastic. I will definitely be reading more Robert Aickman in the future. I need to get my grubby little hands on his other collections. He is fantastic. He is so filmic. Like, I want to go and make all of these stories right now. I want to go shoot them. Just like the vibe of it. I mean, it really made me think of, like, aesthetically, it made me think of movies like Don't Look Now, the Donald Sutherland one where his daughter drowns in the red raincoat. Like the original Wicker Man, Straw Dogs, like that sort of, 70s British, everything is gray and damp. It is just so textural. It is so textural. That is the word that I would use to describe Robert Aickman. Everything. The sentence structure makes you feel. What he's describing makes you feel. His word choices make you feel. I mean, I haven't even talked about his word choices yet. You've probably picked up on it in the passages I've read, but he will use like strange words to describe things. Subfesque, nonpareil. It's like these intentional word choices that are there for the express purpose of eliciting a response, and it works. This was a shockingly good book. Like I said at the beginning, I don't recommend buying this unless you're like a book collector or find it for a good price. Go get one of his other collections. There are some on Amazon for like 15 bucks. But whatever you do, just go read Robert Aickman. He needs to be read. It demands to be read. Whether you're a fan of horror or a fan of like art house films, or both. I mean, he just works on that level, If you like Robert Eggers, read Aickman. If you like David Lynch, read Aickman. You know that scene in Mulholland Drive when fuck, what's that actor's name? He's the guy that played Utz Are Better Than Nuts in Mad Men. Barrett is the character's name. But anyway, the diner scene in Mulholland Drive when he feels this presence and he walks around the corner and then the person pops out? That's kind of like the tension and the scariness in this. There's no real logic there. It is all dreamlike. It is all subjective. And it is just magical. It is magical. If I sound like a madman, it's because this makes you feverish. It is so good. It is so good. It's like if J.L. Carr made A Month in the Country, but then put ghosts in it, I mean, when I do my top 5 books of 2022, I'm going to be so surprised if this is not on that list. It is that good. All right, so I finished the video. I played some video games, I cleaned the house, I ordered Indian food, and it wasn't until I came to editing the end of the video that I realized that I completely forgot to do stickyhometry, the section of these videos where we figure out how sticky a book is, a completely arbitrary and meaningless measurement, however, one that I enjoy doing quite much. And I really wanted to see what Night Voices got because I liked it so much. And I can tell you that now, if Discord wasn't, and I can tell you that now. This book was 185 pages long. There were 29 passages that stuck out to me. Obviously, different passages would probably stand out to you. This is a completely subjective measurement that means fucking nothing. But when we plug that in, we get a stickiness rating of, and remember, the lower the number, the stickier a book is. It means that there's less pages that you have to flip through before you find something sticky. But that gives this a stickiness rating of 6.379. So if we round up, that is 6.4 for Night Voices. All right, back to the regular video now. So that was Robert Aickman. I know we were talking about Night Voices here, but overall, I want to impress upon you. Just go read Aickman. I've said it, 10 times before. I'll say it again. Go read Aickman now. Go buy. I'll put some links in the description of some of his collections that you can buy. Do yourself a favor and just read him. Oh my God, so good. But thank you so much for tuning in to this 3rd episode of Spooky Spooktober Stories. This one was definitely a banger. As always, hope you have a great day, or if you were listening to this before you fell asleep, I hope that you are up right now, phone in hand, pressing buy now on some Robert Aickman. All right, well, we'll catch you next week for the 4th and final installment of our Little October series, and then it's back to other, more regular books. But yeah, thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.